what are, would you say, since we're talking to educators, what are 2 or 3 ways educators could teach about slavery? And this is going to be a somewhat nuanced question, in a way that humanizes the victims of slavery. So that's part A. And then part B would be, at what ages should teachers be teaching sub themes or the theme of slavery?
Okay, so to unpack that just a little bit, here in our museum, we're really focused on the idea of voice. We're really focused on that idea of using voice and using personal experience in particular as well to highlight parts of the transatlantic slave trade that's often hidden. It's very easy to focus on a lot of the source material that we have readily available to a lot of us. And a lot of that source material is often very brutal. It's often very hard to read or very often hard to take on board. And so what we try to do is we try to mix it, and we mix it in connection with the ideas of liberation and resistance. And resistance and liberation are really key. Resistance and liberation are something that is not often targeted within curriculums, even here within the UK. I'm not as well versed on the curriculum within the US, but I'm pretty sure globally it's something that is not necessarily hit upon. And the reason why we focus on it is because that idea of resistance gives that voice. Idea of resistance allows that person to speak their truth. And the truth is something that is important to be understood. What we often see is that these records are tried to be banned or forgotten or hidden. And it's up to us, especially as museum practitioners, that we have to look at our archives. We have to look at that historical context and try and understand what's actually the story trying to be told here. And so if I give you examples within our archives here, and you can have access to some of those archives across the UK, you can read through those, where we have extracts of people's voices and they talk about their experience and they talk about exactly how they resisted, in what forms, in what ways, whether it's things of cultural resistance, whether it's something as simple as naming your child something that seemed rebellious in these times of historical slavery. These are important so that especially children can see that it's not all dark, it's not all dire. There is hope at all times throughout this time period of historical history and slavery. There's always evidence of people trying to fight against the power. And the example I always give is that I myself, being able to speak to you here in this podcast and speak to many other people I've spoken to, is evidence of that resistance. And so if I was going to tell anybody to do any research around how to teach about this history, I would hope that this person would listen and say, I'm going to focus on resistance from this day forward. Because there's resistance, with resistance, you can also then bridge that gap. So you can see how the people who are enforcing these laws upon people try to remove certain identities. And identity is important. So resistance shows that people are trying to fight against that idea of removal of identity, removal of history. So resistance is really key. Liberation as well is really key in the sense of seeing those people who actually were able to find their freedom. Freedom is really important. Freedom is something that is not often spoken about as well. There's very small people or very small amounts of people who are focused on when it comes to the idea of freedom. But we often forget about those people who may have been fighting for freedom, who may have even lost their lives in the fight for freedom itself. Or we see countries, and we not often talk about countries, most notably the idea of Haiti being a country that we often think about in the idea of fighting for freedom. And so focusing on these points of history is really important. I, as educator myself now, try and stay away from those evidences from the UK or where I see evidence from the US, where it talks about the brutality and the harshness of what slavery is. And I try and show kids that at the same time we understand this is happening, we also see evidence of people who are still finding ways to live their lives and still finding ways to hold on to their culture, which is really important because it's still something that we see in this day and age. And people still hold on to those cultures that have been found in historical slavery.